So the Wall Street Journal recently did an article about some people who have started their own, thanks Matt, he's gonna fix that for me, their own side hustle during the pandemic. They have decided to work 2 full-time jobs without the other job knowing about it, right? So because they can do this remotely, and they have to juggle a bunch of things, but most of them said they work no more than 40 hours combined for both jobs. So they're not working more than 40 hours doing 2 jobs. Some of you are taking notes like, I wonder if I could get away with that. So, and they're keeping it from everyone, and they've got all these tips and tricks on how they're doing it. Like they have 2 different computers or 2 different devices, and sometimes they have to be on a meeting at the same time, so they mute it, and they said every once in a while they get called on at both meetings at the same time, so they just drop one of the calls, and then they come back like, so sorry, bad internet. What were you asking again? Or they're known to like decline all meetings. They're like, no, we could just work on that over Slack. That'll just save everyone's time. So people think, oh, they're very efficient. Or what they'll see is if a project is going offline, they're like, well, I'm not gonna step in and make that better because that helps free me up if this project gets bogged down. Or if they have an overambitious coworker, they happily hand off work to that person who's trying to like really impress their boss. So they've got all these ways in which they're working this system, and they feel justified in doing it because they're like, well, this system has taken advantage of me for so long, so I have the right to take advantage of it. And there's a website around all this called Overemployed to teach people how to do this. And they said, why climb the slippery ladder when you can just go through the side door? And what the thing is, what they're doing is not illegal necessarily. I mean, they might be in breach of contract, but they might have some confidentiality issues at stake, or just a conflict of interest. But more often than not, they're just being unethical, right? They're misrepresenting themselves. One person said, I'm not trying to be like a grade A employee. I'm just trying to do enough to not get fired from both jobs. And you think, well, all right, that's at least she's being honest to herself, but not honest to her employer. And this way of living might be really good for your bank account, but it's not good for the soul. It's not good for the soul because there's stress in just trying to keep something hidden from everyone around you. But then there's also the fact that this impairs relationships. The whole point is not to be in relationship with people, because if you're too close, they're gonna figure something out, something's going on. But also people take time, and you don't have time if you're juggling 2 full-time jobs and trying to keep everyone in the dark about it. And what we really see in that way of living is a lack of integrity. Lack of integrity. And this is how we can define integrity. Integrity is the state of being whole and undivided, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. So integrity means you show up as the same person in every single situation. Now, there are social expectations, right? Like what you say to your spouse and what you say to your boss are 2 different things, but you're still the same person. You know what's appropriate, but you're not one person over here and another person over here. The Apostle Paul says it like this: the purpose of my instruction is that all believers would be filled with love that comes from a pure heart, a clear conscience, and genuine faith. A pure heart, clear conscience, and genuine faith. And so that word pure there means it's free from any corruption. There's no corruption, it's pure. And to have a clear conscience means that it's good, it's excellent, and you can discern right from wrong. You can discern good from bad. And then to have a genuine faith means there's nothing false about it. There's nothing feigned. You're not hiding anything. So we could say integrity is to be free from corruption, able to distinguish from right and wrong, and have nothing to hide. That's what integrity looks like. And it's the best way to live for our souls, but the truth is, the world won't always reward you for living with integrity. Like these people who are working 2 jobs, they talk about how they've been able to pay off their debt, they've been able to save for their kids' college account, they've been able to buy sports cars and go on vacation and use PTO and all that. Like, the world may reward you for not living with integrity. And in fact, sometimes choosing integrity might cost you everything, which is what we see as we continue with our story with Joseph, that integrity ends up costing him everything. So last week we talked about how Joseph is part of this terribly dysfunctional family, and all of that dysfunction spills over to eventually Joseph's brothers betraying him and selling him into slavery and deceiving his father Jacob that he's been torn apart by a wild animal. And so last we left Joseph was he had been taken into slavery into Egypt. And this is where we pick up his story. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And so Joseph is purchased by Potiphar. Joseph is a slave. He is considered property. But things start to look up for Joseph, and we're told this. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. And so Joseph ends up in this high-ranking official's house, and things go well for him because Potiphar notices him, and instead of sending him out to the field, which would have been a terrible job, he makes him a household slave. And as he's in the household, he begins to notice everything that Joseph does seems to go well for him. So he makes him his personal attendant first, and then as that goes better, he puts him in charge of the household. And that's not just in charge of the house, but in charge of the entire estate. So Joseph is in charge of all the other slaves, and every business decision that goes on in Potiphar's household, Joseph is in charge of that. And so things are looking really good, and we're told why. The reason why is that the Lord was with Joseph. And that word Lord there is really important because that is Yahweh. And that's the covenantal name of God, right? There's lots of different names, and often we see Lord or God in our translation, but there's all sorts of different names in the Hebrew and in the Greek. But in this one, the Hebrew is Yahweh, and that's the name of the God who made the covenant with Abraham to form a nation. Remember, Genesis, the book that we're in, we're at the end of Genesis. Genesis means origins, and it's the origins of the nation of Israel. And that nation begins with a covenant, with a faithful promise that God makes with Abraham. And he says this, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. All peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." And so Abraham has promised, go here. I'm going to go with you, and I'm going to make you into this great nation, and whoever blesses you, I'm going to bless as well. And through you, everyone will be blessed. And then his son Isaac, as he's traveling along, is given this promise. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For to you and all your descendants, I will give all these lands and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. And so again, Isaac is promised. God, Yahweh, will be faithful to that promise. He will be with him. And then Jacob, when he's out in the wilderness, he's run away from his brother. Jacob is Joseph's father. He's given this promise. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And so when we're told that the Lord is with Joseph, we're told God is being faithful to that covenant. God is Yahweh, the one who said to Abraham that he'll be with him, and to Isaac and to Jacob. That same God is with Joseph. And so it seems like everything's going great. Everything's going to go his way, and it seems that way until it doesn't. And then it all goes downhill. So we're told this. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while, his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, "Come to bed with me." So that term, well built and handsome, the Old Testament is really short on details for most people. That term is only used for two people, Joseph and his mom, Rachel, right? And so if we think about how attractive Joseph is, I want you to think about your celebrity crush, the person that you're like, that person is out of my league. They're so amazing, right? They're this fine human specimen of what it looks like to be attractive. That's the level that Joseph's at, right? He is one of the most attractive people that you've probably ever seen. And so Potiphar's wife takes notice. And what we see here is she says, come to bed with me. This is not a seductive, sweet, playful, flirty statement. This is a command, right? That's the language of that word is a command because she has all the power. She is talking to a slave that she desires, right? And so she commands Joseph, and Joseph refuses. Joseph refuses, and he says this, but he refused. With me in charge, he told her, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house. Everything he owns, he has entrusted to my care. No one is greater in this house than I am. My master has withheld nothing from me except you because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. And so Joseph refuses her. And he refuses her on two grounds. One, this would break the trust that Potiphar has put in me, right? Like, look at all that Potiphar has entrusted me. That would be wrong against Potiphar. But also, this would be a great sin against God. When we here at The Well talk about you're called to love people, love God, right? That's what Joseph's life right now is centered on. This would not be loving to the people around us, and this would not be loving to God. And so he refuses, but she doesn't relent, right? It says day after day after day, she comes at him and commands him and desires this. And she's relentless. She will not take no for an answer. And we have to be really clear. Joseph saying no to her is a big deal. Because one, remember, he is a slave. As much as he's been given authority and entrusted with the estate, he is still considered property. He is not a free person. And so they're not on equal terms here. So there's that power dynamic. But in addition to that, Joseph is in his early 20s, okay? And so let's just think about biologically a young, handsome man in his early 20s, and here's this woman who's asking to have sex with him, and for him to be like, as a man, just saying, nope, nope, nope. He could have easily justified this, right? He could have been like, well, this would be easier. She'll let me alone. It could be fun. But he is so focused on God. He's so centered on God that he's able to say no. He's able to say no. And we would think Joseph's choosing to do the right thing. Amidst all this pressure and all the reasons why he wouldn't choose to do the right thing, he chooses to do the right thing. You think that will be rewarded, right? Because right up until this point, it seems like you could make a really good case for the health and wealth gospel here, for the prosperity gospel of if you're doing the right things, then God's with you and things start to go well for you. But that's not quite how the story goes. So as it continues, we read, one day he went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hand and had run out of the house, she called her household servants. Look, she said to them, this Hebrew who has been brought to us to make sport of us. He came in here to sleep with me, but I screamed. And when he heard me scream for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And she kept his cloak beside her until his master came home. And then she told him this story. That Hebrew slave you brought us came to make sport of me. But as soon as I screamed for help, he left his cloak beside me and ran out of the house. And when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. And Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. All right, I want to just take a step back here. And I want to acknowledge the cultural moment that we live in. Okay, because we, in the last couple years, have lived through the Me Too moment, right? And that Me Too has been a moment where women have been able to bring to light claims of abuse and mistreatment and harassment by powerful men. And it's not just women. There's been men who've been able to do this too. But for the most part, it's been women who've been able to say, this is not okay, right? And we've seen a reckoning around this. But there's also the fear, right? And we've heard this fear of like, well, what if someone falsely accuses someone else and then their career is ruined because we're so quick to believe a claim? I just want to step back and say, that's not what's going on in this story, right? We need to be really careful when we read a cultural moment into a historical text. This is an ancient text, and that's not what's happening here. This text can help us understand our moment, but our moment should not be read into this text. And unfortunately, I've spent a lot of time researching around Joseph, and a lot of people have done that. Like, this is the problem with Me Too. We have to be careful. This is not a Me Too moment in the same way that we see it culturally. So I need to name that so that we can hear it in its own context. Because what we have to remember is, while there is a false accusation here, Potiphar's wife is the one with all the power. Again, Joseph is a slave. He has no power, no authority, no claim, right? He is not considered a person. He's considered property. And so here's this woman, and she somehow, it's arranged that Joseph walks into the house unbeknownst to him that no one else is in there, and she grabs him. And that word grab, again, this is not a flirtatious, subtle moment. That word grab means to seize with violence. Right, so she grabs him in violence, right? This is a forceful situation. This would be what we would call a sexual assault situation. And Joseph flees. And that word flee is the word used in a battle when you've just been defeated and you're running away for your life, right? So Joseph is running for his life out of this house. And what does she do? She takes all of her power and chooses to use it for evil. She gathers the household servants, and she says, this Hebrew. And notice, she no longer desires Joseph. She no longer even uses his name. She makes sure that she emphasizes his ethnicity, that he is different. Why? Because you have to imagine all the other slaves there who are probably Egyptian, right, are feeling like you brought in this foreigner, and now he's over all of us. And so she's stoking all of the animosity and all of the hatred there. And then she keeps the cloak beside her, and when Potiphar comes home, she goes further. She says, this Hebrew slave, right? Not this person, this Hebrew slave that you brought here. And so she emphasizes his status, and she emphasizes Potiphar's role in the whole situation. She shifts the blame to Potiphar, and we're told Potiphar responds with anger. But what's interesting is the crime of attempted sexual assault, just attempted by a citizen, by an Egyptian citizen, is death. That's the crime. That's the penalty for the crime. So the fact that Potiphar, imagine, now Joseph is not a citizen, Joseph is a slave, so even more so, you would expect that Potiphar would execute Joseph. But he doesn't. He puts him in jail. And there's this sign here in that, because that's not what should happen, is that Potiphar in some ways knows that his wife isn't fully telling the truth. But he's not willing to confront her on it. He's not willing to bring that out to light because that might harm his own status. So he still has regard for Joseph, throws him in prison and says the lesser of two evils, but it's still not right. And so Joseph acts with integrity. Joseph has a pure heart, a clear conscience, a genuine faith, and instead, he falls victim to everyone else's lack of integrity around him. Once again, other people's evil choices cause him to suffer. And I wish that I could say that Joseph is an exception. And while it may not be as extreme as getting thrown into an Egyptian prison, right? And Egypt was the only nation at this time that had prisons. So it's pretty terrible. It's a pretty terrible system. And I wish I could say that it wouldn't be that as extreme, but when other people choose to not act with integrity and compromise their own integrity, very often they are rewarded and other people suffer. When you choose the way of integrity, the world does not always reward that. And that is why we see so many people compromise along the way. And someone who's been really helpful, who we're going to draw on today, is Carey Nieuwhof. He has a book called Didn't See It Coming. And it's a great book. If you're in leadership at all or in business at all, I would recommend it. But he's got a chapter on this around compromise and integrity. And so I wanted to camp out with what he said because I thought, well, if he said it better than me, then we're going to go with him. So this is what Carey says. He says, all of us can cheat our values anywhere. Far too many of us end up compromised. Who we are no longer lines up with who we hoped to be. And it happens so subtly that most of the time we don't even know it's going on. Even if your family hasn't forsaken you and it hasn't cost you your job, you may sometimes look in the mirror with the sinking feeling that you didn't do what you should have done and you're not who you should be. And what he says is this compromise rarely happens in one dramatic moment, but it's this subtle drift over time where you just, these small exceptions that you continue to make. Like, you make up an excuse to get out of a commitment. You could have shown up, but instead you didn't. You fudge the truth on your expense report a little bit. You're like, I drove 10 miles more than I said I did. Or this cost a little bit more than what it really did. You claim an item on your tax report, that isn't really business related, but you kind of I've been there before. I'm at dinner with someone, I'm just going to mention that I do this and now I can write this dinner off. You're like, we didn't really talk about your business, but, all right. You lie for your child to get them out of a difficult situation. You make up a story, just to help them out. You let yourself imagine what it might be like to be married to someone else. You're not going to act on it, right? But you just start to think, well, that person, they do all these things that my spouse doesn't do, and so I can just kind of fantasize what that would be like. And this is what Carey Nieuwhof says. He says, the subtle compromises we make day after day, the half-truths, the rationalizations, the excuses create a gap between who we are and who we want to be. You're not a terrible person, but you're certainly not your best either. And if you got dead honest with yourself, you'd say that though you haven't sold your soul to the devil, you've rented it. And I love this line. 1,000 little compromises have left you compromised. 1,000 little compromises have left you compromised. Because that's how compromise happens. It's the small things that we think, it's not that big of a deal. I could do so much worse. Other people are doing worse than me. Anyone would do it. It's not the worst you could do, but it's not. Right? And this is how compromise happens, because one of the main reasons we end up compromising our integrity is we focus so much on competency at the expense of character. Think about all the realms of life that you live in. Think about school and work. Think about sports and volunteer organizations, all the areas that you are part of. And every single one of them wants you to get better at being competent. They will spend money on classes. They will send you to conferences. They will do trainings, all these things to help you get more competent at what you have committed to do. And they will pay you to get more competent. And they will reward you the more competent you get. But here's the thing. No one really pays you to get better with your character. They might hope that you do, but they don't really, and so you get rewarded for being competent over and over again. But think about all of the competent people that we've seen or that personally, right, who spend all of their time getting really, really good at something, whether it's a sports figure, a church figure, someone in business, someone they were the best in their field, right? And it wasn't their competency that tripped them up. It was their character, right? Somewhere along the line, they failed in character. They had an affair. They embezzled. They were abusive with their language, or they were hostile to work with. They lied and they covered it up. And somewhere along the line, their character is what tripped them up. And Carey Nieuwhof says, your competency makes a first impression, but your character makes a lasting impression. And then he says this, all the competency in the world cannot compensate for a lack of character. Ultimately, your character is your lid. Lack of character kills careers, shatters families, ruins friendships, and destroys influence. And so you're so encouraged to develop your competency. And here's the thing. Again, most people don't get paid to develop their character, but you will pay for it eventually if you do not. You are the one who will pay for it. People around you will as well, but it's your life that's going to be on the line. It's your career that's on the line. It's your marriage. It's your family. It's your friendships if you don't invest in your character. And again, this compromising our integrity, it happens subtly. It's something that we drift towards. And he gives 5 signs how you can begin to see that you might be drifting towards compromise. And the first one is this. There's a growing gap between your public and private life. And he says, you're no longer telling the world the truth. I love that. You're no longer telling the world the truth. And so what you say and what you do don't line up. And we know this happens on social media all the time, right? I put the one perfect photo of my family vacation while the rest of the time we were miserable. Or you talk about how wonderful you have it, but really you're miserable 23 out of 24 hours a day. We do this all the time, right? And so we like to craft an identity with our social media, but we do this in all sorts of realms. When we say yes and smile when we mean no, and later we go away and we talk about it to someone else and we complain. If you're upset in a meeting and you don't say something and then you go tell someone else that you're upset, all of that is this gap between your private and your public life. And so that's the first step that we're drifting towards a compromise of integrity. The second one is you start hiding things. And he says that compromise eventually leads to cover up. Compromise leads to cover up. And so you start misleading and misinforming people. So maybe you leave a detail out, or you over-exaggerate a detail, or you just let other people draw their own conclusion. You kind of walk them down the path, but they get to choose if they're going down it. And then the third one is you fail to follow through on what you've said that you're going to do. And this one says that's a natural human thing, where like you might say you're going to do something and then you don't do something. That happens sometimes. But it's when we start making it a pattern. And each time we do it, we excuse ourselves to do it again. So it can be the small things, like you said you were going to commit to something and you didn't commit. You said you were going to follow up with someone and you didn't follow up with them. Or it can be the large things, like suddenly you're not faithful in your marriage, or you're not faithful to your clients. And again, we judge others by their actions. And we judge ourselves by our intentions, right? Others were like, they did that, and that's wrong. But me, it's like, I didn't mean to do that. I didn't intend to walk down that path. So, I have a good reason why I got there. And so we let ourselves off the hook. But the more we do that, the easier it is the next time to fail to follow up with what you said. And then it leads to this. You start to justify your bad actions and decisions. And the way that we do that is we stop apologizing and we start justifying. And blame is the opposite of responsibility. So we start saying anyone would have done this. No one would have made a different decision if they were in my circumstances, right? Because circumstances are to blame suddenly. Like everyone would have chosen this. I didn't have a choice. I had to do this. And then the fifth thing is your life has become all about you. And he says that compromise leads you to craft a life that is entirely self-centered. Where if you're so busy worrying about what people think about you or what's going to get you ahead or what's to your benefit, then eventually you can't care about other people, because other people take time and energy. You have to consider them, but you're not doing that when you're in compromise. You're only considering yourself. And here's the thing, all of these drifts in integrity, they shape your character. Over time, they shape your character. It might be subtly, but it's accumulative. And eventually, you start to be someone that you didn't think you were. And you have that wake up and look in the mirror, and you're like, I'm not quite who I thought I was going to be. Compromise gets easier and easier over time. If we step back, we can see these at work in the Joseph story, right? We can see that there's a gap between what Potiphar's wife's outside life and what's really going on, right? Like she is trying to pressure Joseph to sleep with her behind her husband's back. And then when that doesn't go well, what does she do? She hides, she lies, she justifies it. It's not my fault, it's your fault. You brought him here. Right? And then Potiphar, same thing. He justifies his own, anyone would have done this. Anyone would have made this decision, put in my situation. Like, what am I supposed to do? Challenge my wife and give up my status? Like, that's not okay. I'm not going to do that. Everyone would have chosen to throw Joseph in jail. It was the merciful thing to do. It was the best thing to do in a bad situation. When you see it over and over again, and their lives have become all about them. And Joseph easily could have compromised, right? It would have gone so much easier for him, but we would have seen these things at play as well, where he'd start to have to hide it and justify it and say, well, I don't have a choice. I'm a slave. She's my master. I have to do what she says. And we slowly drift away from where we wanted to focus our life. And it's how compromise happens in our own lives too. Because it either happens in one of two ways. Someone comes to you and asks you to do something that you just have that gut check that's not quite right. You don't feel comfortable with it. It could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be an employer, it could be a friend, it could be a spouse, it could be a child, anyone. They ask you to do something and you just know, I probably shouldn't do that. Or you find yourself in a situation and you justify that compromise because it either is going to benefit you or keep you out of trouble. And you think, it's not that big a deal, it's just a small thing, but it's going to make things go easier for me, and anyone would choose it. Anyone would do this, right? That's how compromise happens. And unfortunately, choosing integrity doesn't happen by going to a conference or going on a retreat, right? Those things, they might help you see where you might have been straying and drifting, but he says character and integrity are formed in the daily grind of life, because that's where your character and your integrity are going to be challenged. Just like Joseph had to choose integrity every day in the face of Potiphar's wife, that's the same thing for us. And I know that's been true for my friend Nate. So my friend Nate, he's one of my very best friends, Nate and Marcy, and he's an incredible person, right? He is a faithful follower of Jesus. He's a great father, and he has a wonderful business mind. He is brilliant when it comes to business. And he's also one of the most genuine people I've ever met. He embodies integrity with a pure heart, clear conscience, genuine faith, and it has not served him well in business at all. It has not served him well in his career because here's the pattern. Nate works in supply chain management, and he's had the opportunity to work some very large companies, and here's the pattern of Nate's career. That Nate joins a company, at a mid-level, does really well, because he's really good at business, works his way up, and he's eventually working with the senior level leadership, and he eventually has some supervisor who asks him to do something that he knows he shouldn't do. And it might be a small thing, but he just knows, that's not right. Because Nate has chosen, just like Joseph, to center his life on honoring God and honoring others. That's what he's decided to do. And so what inevitably happens is Nate gets in the situation where they're like, just bill the client for a few extra hours, or put it under this, or, ignore this terrible dynamic over here because everybody's ignoring it, and just let it slide. He gets in these situations, and Nate has chosen to live with integrity. And so what happens is he ends up with someone who has gotten ahead by compromising their integrity. And Nate becomes this threat to them because he won't compromise that. He just will not. He's been committed to it. And so what happens to him is whoever this supervisor is eventually, and this has been like company after company after company, is so threatened by Nate being the most honest person in the room that they start to make his life miserable, and they work against him. Either they give him the most awful work that the team could get, or they verbally harass him at work, or they maneuver against him with the higher-ups, and time after time after time, Nate gets punished for being the one person who will tell the truth, because as he's climbed the ladder in these companies, he's seen, I'm surrounded by people who have worked a system by compromising their own integrity, and nobody wants to upend that. Nobody actually wants to look at themselves or how we're getting ahead. And so he has struggled with it, and that is the challenge of integrity. The challenge of integrity is more often than not, you will be rewarded for compromise. More often than not, you choosing to look the other way, keep your mouth shut, go with the flow, will get you ahead. More often than not. And choosing integrity is not a guarantee that things will go well for you. But the more that we compromise our integrity, it compromises our character. And Dallas Willard says, in the end, your character is the only asset that you take with you. It's the only asset that matters in your whole life, right? Everything else when you die is going to be gone. But God has given you a soul to develop. And in the end, you're going to have to give account for what you chose to do with that. And Jesus says it like this. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Choosing integrity does not mean that you will get rewarded this side of heaven. It doesn't. It doesn't. And just like Joseph, you have to decide what you're going to center your life on, what's going to center your decisions and your actions. And somewhere between the pit and Potiphar's house, Joseph came to realize the Lord was with him. And Joseph chose to single-heartedly and single-mindedly follow after that God. And think about it. It would have been so much easier to assimilate in Egypt. No one worshiped Yahweh there. He got his choice of gods to worship. But he chose to worship Yahweh. And in that, it forced him to go one way and not another way, because he was not willing to compromise his own character and integrity, because God was so at the center of his life. And he ends up being the victim of other people's evil choices. But God is still faithful to him. Yahweh is still with him, we're told. But while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. And he showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And so let's be really clear. Joseph's circumstances are terrible, right?
where he is terrible. It's not the path that he would have chosen. And I don't believe it's the path that God would have chosen for him. But as we said last week, God is not the cause of all the bad things that happen, but nothing is wasted in the kingdom of God. God will take everything, even the bad choices of other people, and work the greatest amount of good in it. And so God is faithful to Joseph, even in the light of other people's bad decisions. And I've seen this with Nate over and over again. His career path does not look like what he wanted it to look like. You know, he looks at his resume and sometimes he feels like I'm a total failure. I thought I'd work my way up in one company. Instead, he's been at one company after another and been in one toxic situation after another, and yet the Lord has continued to provide for him. God has been faithful to him. And here's the thing, when you choose integrity, it does not go unnoticed by God. And all of the rewards that this world will offer you for compromise are not worth it. They are not worth compromising your soul and your character over. They're not worth it. Jesus says, what can you give in exchange for your soul? It's the one thing that matters. And so, yeah, you might suffer this side of heaven. You might end up being hurt. You might be the victim of other people's evil choices. You might be ground down by a system that is full of compromise. But that is not a reason for you to compromise. That is not a reason for you to let go of your integrity, because in the end, Jesus says it's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that matters. What you will be judged on is not what you have and how successful you were in the standards of the world. You will be judged on what you did with your character, with your soul. And so compromise happens day in and day out, and choosing integrity happens day in and day out. Because you're not going to choose what's right when it's going to cost you something if you're not choosing what's right on a daily basis. That's just the truth. Because there's going to come a point in your life where choosing the way of integrity is not going to be rewarded. It might even hurt you. And unless you've been making it a habit of choosing the way of Jesus over and over and over again, you won't do it when it matters most. And so, again, Carey Nieuwhof gives 3 ways that we can practice integrity on a regular basis, that we can keep shaping ourselves towards integrity. So the first one is this: take responsibility. Take responsibility. You see where you have compromised and own it. Accept that you're the problem. Again, blame is the opposite of responsibility. So sure, you can blame your circumstances, your spouse, your boss, your company, your coach, your teacher, your kids. You can blame whoever, your neighbors, whoever you want. None of them make you compromise. Nobody makes you compromise your integrity. It doesn't matter if they're compromising their integrity. Nobody makes you compromise yours. You alone are responsible for the decisions that you make. And so we have to get real honest with ourselves about where we have started to let ourselves off the hook, where we've started to drift, If you've been taking money that's not yours, if you've been taking office supplies that are not yours, you think, well, this company takes everything from me, I can take this whole thing of Post-its. Well, why? Why do you think that you deserve that? It's still stealing. If it's not yours, it's stealing, right? Misleading others with false accounts, cheating on a test, cheating on your spouse, lying about how much work you do, looking the other way when others are deceptive. Those are all choices you're making. No one's making that choice for you. And so the first way to choose integrity is to start looking at what ways have I compromised? Because your character is the one thing you take with you in the end, but it's also the one thing you take with you everywhere you go. You can't get away from yourself. You are the common denominator in your life. There's a song by the Avett Brothers. They're one of my favorite bands, and they've got a great line that says, nothing happens here that doesn't happen there, right? Like, you take you with you. And so if you don't work on you, you can change everything else in your life, and that's not going to change, right? So take responsibility. The second thing is make your talk match your walk. Make your private walk match your public talk. And I love this because Carey Nieuwhof says most of us, if we actually had to broadcast the truth, we would not like that. It's really uncomfortable. And he says, eventually, if you're honest, if you're committed enough to say, I'm going to make what I say in public and what I do in private match, if the truth is so uncomfortable, you will eventually change what is true, right? And think about this. Again, social media. I know so many marriages that are riddled with bitterness and anger, and yet they come up to whatever anniversary it is, and they put this big picture up of them out at dinner, be like, married for 35 years. Really, if it was honest, they'd be like, we resent each other. We can't stand being around one another. We make others uncomfortable all the time in our dynamic, but we had a great dinner, right? If they were really honest about it, but instead once a year they put up a picture, it's like, look at us, aren't we so great? Longevity is not the sign of a good marriage, right? You can be miserable for many, many years and still not have a good marriage. So if we really got honest, Steve and I made this commitment with Nate and Marcy, our best friends, when we were newly married, that we would not show up at each other's houses if we were in the middle of an argument. And so we were going to meet them for dinner one day, and Steve and I were working through something, and we had to call and be like, yeah, we're going to be late. And then we still weren't resolved, so an hour later, we're like, I don't think we're making it for dinner, and we had to just be honest about this is what's going on. If you choose to say, I'm someone who's late all the time, or I'm someone who I can't take on that project, I'm not responsible enough, or I'm out of my league, or I gossiped about you. If you actually made your talk and your walk line up, and it was public enough that people could see it, you would change the way that you walk. You would, because it's not about changing the way that you talk. It's not about hiding more. It's about being who you say you want to be. Have the humility to admit your shortcomings and then work on them. And the third thing then is put yourself first when it comes to personal growth. Put yourself first when it comes to personal growth. It is more selfish. It is more selfish to live with compromised integrity than it is to work on your character. I teach a class here called Kairos, and some of you are going to be starting that in a few weeks. Some of you have gone through it, and people struggle with it at first because they're like, it's a lot of me, learning about me. I'm like, yeah, learn about you so you can live your best self in the world, because that's a gift to everyone else. You living compromised, you choosing to put yourself above others in terms of self-protection is not helping anyone. That is a selfish way to live. It is far more beneficial to you and those around you. It is a gift when you work on being a better person. And that means you have to decide how you use your time. Because so many of us spend all of our time, or the majority of our time, getting competent. And you don't spend time on your character, right? And so what are the things that actually develop character? Because you can be as competent as you want. Your character is what will trip you up. Your character is your lid. So what are the things that actually build your character? Make time for reading your Bible, prayer, journaling, exercise, intentional friendships, counseling, church. That's what we're doing here. Like, if you haven't noticed it, every week we talk about character. It's about being like Jesus, learning to live and love like Jesus. If you want to get better in your character, come here regularly, right? Because you'll get that gut check over and over again. It's why preaching's so hard. Because man, I got to preach it to myself first, right? You got to learn how to live it first before you go out and tell people how to do it. Decide how you're going to spend your time before it gets decided for you. I know parents who won't miss a soccer game, but I'm going to tell you, parents, you won't miss a baseball game or basketball game. While your kids might appreciate that, you know what they're going to appreciate more? Is a parent who lives with integrity, a parent who has a strong relationship with Jesus, a parent who's worked on themselves and is teaching them how to live too. They're not going to remember that you showed up to every game if you're a jerk. I promise you. If you can't have a relationship, if you can't have a conversation, if you're guarded, you're not doing them any favors by showing up to every sporting event. Work on yourself. Work on yourself is the best gift that you can give to those around you. Because compromise happens subtly and over time, but no one can choose it for you. I've been a pastor for a long time, and I have to tell you, I have people come in my office all the time who want to talk and they want to change. They tell me all their problems, and they leave, and they don't make any choice to change. And I have to tell people who are in ministry over and over again, and it's hard reality to learn, you can't want it more than they want it for themselves. I can't want personal growth for you more than you want it for yourself. I can't work harder on it than you can work on it. I want all of you to grow to be more and more like Jesus. I want everyone in this room to experience the freedom of what it is to live like Jesus, even if it costs you everything. There is freedom in that. I can't want it for you. You have to want it. You have to choose it. Only you can choose to walk that road. And this is what Carey Nieuwhof says. He says, if you go through the deep journey Jesus invites you to take, you'll stop compromising. Your outside will begin to look like your inside. You won't need to hide because there is nothing left to hide. You'll be so consistent that there will be no distinction between who you are publicly and who you are privately. Keeping your word will be easy because your yes will mean yes and your no will mean no. And here's the best news of it all. God is faithful through all of it. It doesn't matter if you're in a high or a low, if you're rewarded or you're punished for your integrity. God is faithful through all of it. His promises are consistent. Let's pray. Gracious God, we're so grateful for who you are and what you do in our lives. We're so grateful for the call of integrity and the way that you call us to live and work and love, God. We ask that you would give us the courage to choose your way even when it's hard. God, that you would help us to take responsibility and to get honest about the ways that we've compromised and we've let ourselves off the hook, Lord, where we've justified things that we know aren't right. God, that you would help us to have the courage to make our walk and our talk line up, God, that who we are publicly and who we are privately would be the same, that we would live consistently, Lord, and that you would help us to choose to grow in character above anything else, God, because again, it's the only thing we take with us, and it's what you measure the worth of a life. God, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity each week to come and grow, to be more like you. Help us to lean into that, God. Help us to not leave here and just ignore what it is that you're putting on our heart, Holy Spirit, but that we would take notice and that we would take steps towards it. Because you want to set us free to be who it is that you've created us to be, and we're so grateful for that. And we pray all this in Jesus' name.